I've said this before, I'll say it again. I'll probably say it a few more times this week. I am firmly on let the birth rate plummet to hell. I do not believe that the United States and many other patriarchal, extra right-wing conservative countries deserve the sacrifices that go along with motherhood. So this article from The Atlantic was right up my alley, especially with this title. The birth rate crisis isn't as bad as you've heard. It's worse. Humanity is set to start shrinking several decades ahead of schedule. So we are doing our job, ladies. Let's check out this article. First, the bad news. Global fertility is falling fast. The aging populations of rich countries are relying on ever fewer workers to support their economy, dooming those younger generations to a future of higher taxes, higher debt, or later retirement, or all three. Birth rates in middle-income countries are also plummeting, putting their economic development at risk. Practically the only countries set to continue growing are desperately poor. By about 2084, according to the gold standard United Nations World Population Prospects, the global population will officially begin its decline. Rich countries will all have become like Japan, stagnant and aging, and the rest of the world will have become old before it ever got the chance to become rich. Sorry, did I say bad news? That was actually the good news based on estimates that turned out to be far too rosy. Every 2 years, the UN's demographers revise their population projections, and for the past 10 years, they've always had to revise in the same direction, down. Next year, they'll do so again. In reality, the worldwide population decline is set to begin decades ahead of their expectations because global fertility trends are much worse than they, and probably you, think. Jesus Fernandez Villaverde, a University of Pennsylvania macroeconomist, studies how poor countries develop. This development usually happens alongside a fertility transition. As people move from rural areas to cities, their economic opportunities expand, and kids become less crucial as a source of agricultural labor. Women gain access to contraception and education. They go from having about 6 kids on average to 2. Fernandez Villaverde calls this the standard modernization story, and he's been teaching it for decades. Much of Fernandez Villaverde's research focuses on Latin America, an economically middling region where one would expect middling fertility rates. In recent years, however, births in some Central and South American countries have plummeted to rates far lower than most rich countries, in defiance of the standard modernization story. Each year, Fernandez Villaverde updates his data on Latin American birth rates, which he gathers from the country's official birth certificates. I said birth certificates. This says birth statistics. My bad. In preparation for a class he teaches about the region's economic history. He first began noticing in 2019 that the U.S. was too optimistic, but only in the past few years did the discrepancies become downright alarming. For 2024, the UN projected 701,000 births in Colombia. It had put the chance of the number of births being lower than 553,000 at only 2.5%. In the end, Colombia saw only 445,000 births in 2024. It projected 701,000. It got 445,000 births in 2024. High five, ladies. That translates to a fertility rate of 1.06 births per woman, down more than half from 2008. Chile's is even lower. At current rates, 100 reproductive age Chileans can expect to have 52 children and only 27 grandchildren. Demographers generally consider a birth rate of about 2.1 to be replacement level, or the point at which a society doesn't shrink from one generation to the next. The discrepancies were not limited to South America. In 2024, Poland's births were also below the 2.5% probability cutoff, as were Estonia's and Cuba's and Azerbaijan and Sri Lanka's and Egypt's. These supposed outlier results aren't outliers at all. The world is just not having as many babies as the UN thought it would. Digging into the UN's model, Fernandez Villaverde found something even stranger. For nearly every low fertility country, the UN projects either one or of two outcomes. The fertility rate will flatten or it will rise to a number somewhere between 1 and 2 births per woman, still below replacement level, but not quite as catastrophic. The United States is in the first category. Our fertility rate has fallen steadily since the Great Recession, from 2.1 to 1.6. One might therefore expect the decline to continue, but the UN projects that the U.S. birth rate will stay flat, not just this year, but also in 2026 and 2030 and 2060 and 2090, never rising above 1.7 or dipping below 1.6. Ladies, I think that we can do a better job than where we are right now. I think we can get it lower than 1.6. He says, in the other category are countries such as Thailand, whose fertility rate has been falling for 72 years and has never stopped for longer than a single year. Nonetheless, there the UN projects a demographic miracle. Starting in 2 years, the country's birth rate will begin to climb, first slowly and then a little more quickly, finishing out the century with a birth rate of 1.45, up from its projected 2024 low of 1.2. Every part of that appears to be wrong. In reality, Thailand's reported birth rate last year was 0.98. The preliminary 2025 data showed the decline continuing. In a country the size of Thailand, the difference between the UN's projection and the real fertility rate through the 21st century will amount to millions of people who will never be born. All in all, as Fernandez Villaverde recently explained at a research symposium in London, humanity won't start to shrink in 2084. It will start to shrink in 2055, if not sooner. There are two types of people. Alice Evans, a British professor who studies falling fertility rates around the world, posted on X after reading Fernandez Villaverde's presentation. Those not bothered about demographics and those who read Jesus's slides. The UN has a simple explanation for its optimistic projections. Fertility has rebounded in the past, so it will rebound again. In Belarus, for example, the fertility rate in 1988 was at replacement level. It fell to an abysmal 1.22 only 9 years later, but then it rebounded all the way up to 1.73 by 2015. Australia's birth rate fell to 1.7 in 2001, only to bounce back to 2 in 2008. France's rate followed a similar trajectory during the same period, as did Italy's and Sweden's. To the extent you think the world population prospects are wrong, that is the extent to which you are saying, this time is different. Lyman Stone, a PhD student and birth rate consultant, told me. The thing is, this time really does look different. Birth rates in Australia and France and Italy and Sweden have now fallen to an all-time lows, excluding during World War I in France's case. Belarus, a one-time redemption story, recorded a fertility rate of just 1.1 last year, lower than the lowest of lows the country experienced in the 1990s. Deaths outnumbered births by nearly 2 to 1. If a rebound is coming, there are no signs of it yet. Fernandez Villaverde estimates that the world is already below replacement fertility. The population is not just projected, but guaranteed to shrink if things don't change. That was not the case in the 90s. The UN's model hasn't adjusted to the new normal. If a country has never experienced a fertility increase, as Australia and France and Belarus have, then its birth rate is assumed to be stable. If a country has never experienced an increase, then the model assumes that it will at some point, once fertility gets low enough. In other words, the model assumes at its end state a stable and modest number of births. This is perhaps a reflection of humanistic optimism. There is at some point a minimum social capacity to adapt and eventually at least address some of the concerns or challenges that exist in the country. Patrick Gerlin, the chief author of World Population Prospects, told me, the people living in those countries don't necessarily want their country to totally disappear. To his point, the model comes with a hard-coded minimum. No country can ever be projected to have a fertility rate of less than 0.5 children per woman. Like the rest of the model, this too might need to be revised. Macau, which the UN analyzes separately from mainland China, had a fertility rate of 1.2 a decade ago. Last year, it fell to 0.58, and it looks to fall even further. In the first 4 months of 2025, births were down another 13%. If you're not sure why this is also alarming, consider Japan, the canonical example of the threat that low fertility poses to a country's economic prospects. At its peak in 1994, the Japanese economy made up 18% of the world GDP, but eventually the country's demographics caught up with it. Now Japan's median age is 50 years old, and the country's GDP makes up just 4% of the global economy. Measured per hours worked, Japan's economic growth has always been strong, but at some point you just don't have enough workers. The fertility rates that doom the Japanese economy range from 1.3 to 1.5. So imagine what's in store for modern-day Colombia at 1.06 and Chile at 1.03. How will they grow with so few workers? How will they ever become rich if each worker is expected to provide for so many elderly people? The overly optimistic UN have obscured just how urgent these questions really are, because if the birth rate continues to drop around the world at its current pace, the economic growth and workers' retirement prospects will go the way of those projections, adjusting every few years to a smaller, sadder, poorer future. So, like most of the other birth rate articles that I read, everything is about data, numbers, money, the economy, the workers, retirement, the elderly, support, needing workers for tax purposes and needing workers to take care of the aging population. At no point in time are they ever addressing the things that women are talking about. Women want men to do more parenting. Women are not safe and secure. They are talking about the GDP and all of this, but how many of these people in these particular countries are working for peanuts and are barely able to survive off of the wages they are making in their countries? Why would women want to bring babies into this world if they are thinking women and have access to birth control? Why would they do this? These people, they can keep on talking about birth rates and adjusting up and adjusting down and all of this and blah, 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 blah. But until they start talking about the sociological impact and the reasons why, the work culture, the political environment, the fact that rural hospitals are closing down, the fact that politics are pushing medical staff away, the fact that the political environment is making it so that women don't even want to do residencies in red states. Until they start talking about some of these climate change, no child care available. If there is child care available, it's way too expensive. The way they are coming for teachers. There are so many reasons why people, at least that I've talked to or seen talk about, don't want to have children. When are these demographers going to get to the root causes of right now? Why I keep saying the birth rate needs to plummet to hell. There are so many reasons. I know that I do have children, but I, a mother, would know exactly the type of commitment financially, the type of emotional commitment and physical commitment it takes to raise children. And I do not believe that this country, as it stands, deserve the commitment and sacrifice from mothers, from women. So let the birth rate plummet to hell. Join the conversation. Let me know what you think about all this. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.